There are poor cities in America, and there are places where poverty isn't just a problem, it's basically part of the city's identity. You see it in the boarded up storefronts, you see it in the neighborhoods where half the houses look like the owners lost a job in '96 and never recovered. You see it in the schools, the streets, the wages, the vacant lots, and the way entire parts of the city feel like they've been waiting on help since your cool uncle had frosted tips. Now, before someone in the comment section starts typing in all caps with one finger, let's get one thing straight. This isn't about making fun of poor people. People living in poverty are usually the ones working the hardest to just survive. This is about the cities themselves, the system, the leadership, the lost jobs, the bad policies, and the decades of neglect. And of course, every city on this list does have some nice areas, every single one. Even the roughest cities in the United States usually has one or two neighborhoods with yoga studios and coffee places. That doesn't change the larger picture of the city. Today we're looking at 10 of the poorest major cities in the United States based on percentages given by the US Census. So before we get started, if you like what we're doing here and you appreciate this channel, please give the video a big thumbs up or like, maybe even share it. Alright, let's take a look. Number 10, St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis is one of those cities that should be doing better than it actually is. It's got history, it's got sports, it's got culture, it's got amazing barbecue, it's got one of the most recognizable monuments in the country, a giant stainless steel arch. If it could solve poverty, St. Louis would be doing amazing. But sadly, civic landmarks don't pay electric bills or buy barbecue for you. Imagine if they did. I'd move to St. Louis. Nearly 30% of the population in St. Louis lives in poverty, and that tells you that the city has some serious structural problems. This isn't some little patch of hardship hidden behind tourist areas. It's baked into the city's reality. Certain neighborhoods are stable and attractive, sure. They've been working hard on those. Other neighborhoods look like the city government drove by once, shrugged, rolled up their windows, and kept driving. Now, a lot of St. Louis's issues go back decades. Population loss hit the city hard, so did suburban flight, so did disinvestment. And when people with money leave, they usually take tax revenue, political attention, and a good chunk of momentum with them. That leaves entire communities trying to hold things together with fewer resources and a lot more problems. And the worst part, St. Louis really does have all the ingredients to be great. It has location, legacy, institutions, major employers, and cultural weight. But it also has fragmentation, inequality, and a habit of letting some neighborhoods get left behind while the city talks endlessly about what it could become someday. Which is nice. Someday is affordable, but people have rent due on the first. In 2025, 29.2% of St. Louis population live below the poverty line. Number 9, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Milwaukee is often described as just a hard-working Midwestern city with beer, baseball, and people who can grill in weather that would make penguins reconsider life choices. And that's just part of the story. The other part of the story is poverty and crime. Lots of both. Milwaukee is right on the edge of that 30% line, which means nearly 1 in 3 residents is living below the poverty line. That's not a little economic hiccup. That's a city with deep-rooted problems that don't get fixed by putting another brewery downtown and calling it revitalization. Milwaukee has struggled for years with segregation, manufacturing decline, and a pretty brutal divide between neighborhoods that are doing okay and neighborhoods that have been trapped in generational poverty. That divide is one of the city's biggest issues. You can have pockets of prosperity, but if whole sections of the city still lack opportunity, transportation access, investment, and stable employment, then the city's overall health is still in really bad shape. And honestly, that's Milwaukee's curse. It has potential, it has talent, it has a decent location, it has cultural identity, but it also has a long history of economic inequality that didn't just magically disappear because someone renovated a warehouse into loft apartments for people named Trevor and Madison. Now, what's really interesting is for the most part, the rest of Wisconsin doesn't have much crime. Milwaukee is really the only city that has a good amount of crime in this entire state. And Milwaukee's still trying to figure out how to make progress feel like progress for everyone, not just a few blocks near the water. I like Milwaukee. I think it's a pretty cool place. 29.9% of Milwaukee's population lives below the poverty line. Number 8, Toledo, Ohio. Toledo is one of those cities that people forget exists until a list like this comes along or you watch MASH reruns. If you don't remember, Klinger is from Toledo. Big fan of the Mud Hens. Side note, the Toledo Mud Hens are still a thing. Yes, they're a AAA baseball team, minor league baseball. But when people hear bad stories about Toledo, they think, yeah, that makes sense. Saying Toledo's in bad shape is not a shot at Toledo. That's just the reality of being a Midwestern industrial city that got hit hard when the old economy packed its bags and left town. Toledo was built on manufacturing. For a long time, those jobs supported families, neighborhoods, the entire local economy. But when those jobs faded, so did a lot of the city's stability. Now, there was a time Toledo was a very, very good city to be a blue-collar worker. Was it a perfect city? No, but the average person could afford a house, could afford to take the family out for dinner occasionally. That slowly started to change in the early 70s and really never slowed down. Years ago, I was talking to one of my subscribers. She's actually, I think, a zookeeper at the Toledo Zoo. She said there's parts of the city where she'd rather just stay in the zoo than visit those places. Now the poverty rate sits around 3.1%, which is rough no matter how you slice it. That means nearly 1/3 of the city is living below the poverty line, like we've talked about in other cities on this list. Toledo has the same problems a lot of Rust Belt cities have. Lost jobs, aging housing, underfunded neighborhoods, lower wages, out-migration, schools trying to do more with less, streets and commercial corridors that feel like they've been waiting for a comeback story that never got picked up for a second season. And there are the people of Toledo doing their best to turn things around, but the city still feels like it's living in the shadow of what it used to be. It's hard to build a new future when the old foundation got ripped out and nobody really replaced it with anything sturdy. Toledo isn't hopeless, but it is one of those places where affordable sometimes just means the local economy lost custody of ambition. They're in desperate need of a major manufacturer just coming in there, or some kind of business where they need a lot of people. That's what this city needs, and they can't seem to wrangle one in. 30.1% of their population lives below the poverty line. Number 7, Newark, New Jersey. Newark is one of the strangest on this list because it sits right next to enormous wealth and still manages to struggle like a broke college kid with a stripper addiction. And that's what makes it sting. Newark is close to Manhattan, it's close to jobs, transit, ports, airports, universities, all kinds of opportunity on paper, but paper has a way of lying when real people are still dealing with poverty, expensive housing, and neighborhoods that haven't shared equally in the region's growth. Newark's poverty rate is ugly all by itself, but when you factor in the cost of living in North Jersey, it looks even worse. Being poor in an expensive city is hard. Being poor in a metro area where everything costs too much is like getting kicked while somebody charges you for the service and privilege of being kicked by them. Now, to be fair, Newark absolutely has made progress in some ways. There's redevelopment, more investment, and a stronger image than it had years ago. But not all comebacks are created equally. Sometimes revitalization means newer buildings for people who already had options, while longtime residents keep dealing with the same old issues in the same old neighborhoods, with the same old potholes and broken sidewalks. And that's what keeps Newark on this list. It's not that the city lacks assets, it's that access to those assets are uneven. Some parts are moving forward, others are standing on a platform watching the train leave without them. That's the kind of thing that turns economic progress into press releases instead of reality. 30.4% of Newark's population lives below the poverty line. Number 6, Buffalo, New York. Buffalo's been in comeback mode for about 15 years now, and they've made some progress. Not enough, but they've made some progress. And to be fair, parts of the city have really improved. Waterfront investment, downtown energy, better branding, more outside attention, all the good stuff. But the poverty rate here is still over 30%, which means a lot of the city's comeback has been more brochure than breakthrough. Like, sounds good on a press release and in the newspaper, maybe even the local news. They show that they put a new sidewalk in someplace. But then you venture away from that sidewalk, half a mile, and it still looks like garbage. Buffalo was once a major industrial hub. Then the jobs disappeared, the population dropped, and the city spent decades trying to recover from economic gut punches that just kept landing. Some neighborhoods stabilized, others didn't. Some got shiny new projects, others got forgotten and whispered about. Now, the worst part is poverty in Buffalo feels a little extra cruel because of the weather. Struggling financially is already exhausting. Doing it while lake effect snow is trying to bury your car, your house, your sidewalk, and your will to live just feels rude. Winter in Buffalo doesn't build character, it bills you for it. Yeah, if you don't know, Buffalo is one of the snowiest cities we have in the United States. That lake effect just tears them up in the winter. I've seen some reports where some years they're the snowiest and then others where other ones are. So it's one of those ones that, depending on what year you look at it, they're definitely one of the snowiest cities we have in the United States. And that is brutal, especially when you're broke. But like so many of the cities, the biggest issue here is that the progress they've been having isn't spread evenly. Certain areas get investment, the restaurants, the headlines, and the look at us now treatment, while other parts of the city are still dealing with concentrated poverty, poor housing stock, and limited opportunity. Buffalo isn't as bad as some outsiders assume, but it's also not a miracle rebound some people want it to be. For too many residents, the city still feels like a place that got hurt badly decades ago and never fully stopped limping. Buffalo sadly has become a punchline over the last decade or so because of the poverty and just how the city's been run. Hopefully they turn it around, but, their poverty sucks. It's actually 30.9% of their population lives below the poverty line. Number 5, Fresno, California. Whenever people think California, they picture beachfront homes, movie stars, beautiful weather, and people paying $14 for toast because apparently your avocado was raised by monks. But that's not California and Fresno. Fresno is part of California that ruins the fantasy. It's not polished, it's not glamorous, it's not trying to sell you a lifestyle brand. It's a big inland city where a lot of people are working hard and still not getting ahead. Fresno has one of the highest poverty rates among major cities in the country. Here they are at number 5. That's especially brutal in California, where the cost of living can take a decent paycheck and turn it into a survival puzzle. Housing costs, utility bills, food prices, transportation, everything adds up. And Fresno has long had lower wages and fewer high-paying opportunities than the more famous cities on the coast. This part of California is filled with really horrible cities. Bakersfield isn't great, it's getting better. You also got Stockton, which is a nightmare, Modesto, and Fresno. They all just kind of suck. But Fresno is one of those places where people can be fully employed and still be broke, which is one of the most aggressively American thing possible in 2026. The region is farming, logistics, and a growing economy in some sectors, but that doesn't always translate into a broader prosperity for the people that actually live there. This city was created for farming, and as the years went on, they need fewer and fewer people working on farms. They brought in other industries, but it's just not that good. You can only have so many Burger King assistant managers, right? And because Fresno gets overshadowed by Los Angeles, San Diego, and the Bay Area cities, it doesn't get talked about as much outside of California unless someone's discussing heat, air quality, and why rent is still somehow too high in a city no one wants to live in. Fresno is what happens when you mix California prices with inland wages and hope for the best. Spoiler alert, the best doesn't always show up. My buddy Eric grew up in Fresno, and he's the first one to tell you what a hellhole the place is, especially during the summer. The poverty rate in Fresno is 31.5%. Number 4, Miami, Florida. Miami might be the flashiest city on this list, which is exactly why the poverty rate feels so absurd. This is a city full of luxury condos, exotic cars, rooftop pools, influencers pretending that life isn't one big missed paycheck away from chaos, and enough cosmetic surgery to rebuild half the country. On the surface, Miami looks rich, but a huge number of residents are not living that version of Miami. That's the one you see in Instagram and TikTok videos. You don't see the real Miami when you're looking at influencers. Yeah, that city is a different story once you've bit past the filtered Instagram nonsense. A lot of Miami's economy evolves around tourism, hospitality, service work, and industries that don't really pay enough to live comfortably in Miami. And that's the trap. The city sells a luxury image while a massive portion of the workforce is trying to survive in one of the most expensive housing markets in the region. So you end up with visible wealth everywhere and invisible struggles packed right underneath it. That's the thing about Miami. It's a city of extreme contrasts. Boats and budget stress. Designer stores and paycheck panic. Penthouse views with people sharing apartments because there's no other way to stay close to work. You can have billions of dollars in real estate and still have a city where regular people are getting squeezed from every direction. Miami is a gorgeous city, there's no denying that, but beauty is free to look at and incredibly expensive to live next to. And really, for a lot of residents, the city feels less like paradise and more like a really attractive financial ambush. 31.7% of their population lives below the poverty line. Number 3, Baltimore, Maryland. Look at that, we're talking about poverty in Maryland and not the crime rate, which is pretty high most of the time. Baltimore is one of those cities where the potential is obvious the second you look at it. Great location, historic neighborhoods, waterfront, major institutions, port access, strong identity, good food, character for days. You can see all the pieces of a great city sitting right there on the table. Yet over 1/3 of their population lives in poverty, and that's a disaster. Baltimore has been struggling with entrenched poverty, disinvestment, and neighborhood inequality for generations. Some areas are stable and even thriving. Other areas look like they've been stuck in a time capsule filled with neglect and frustration. The city has been trying to fix itself for a very long time, but the progress often feels patchy and inconsistent, like putting fresh paint in one room while the rest of the house is on fire. Crime hasn't helped. Corruption hasn't helped. Broken trust in leadership definitely hasn't helped. And the concentration of poverty in certain neighborhoods has made it harder for families to escape the cycle. When schools are struggling, jobs are scarce, and safety is shaky, you're not exactly operating with a full deck. Baltimore is sad because it feels fixable. It always has. I mean, Baltimore is a great city, and they've got a ton of potential. But they have far too many areas where I think politicians look at them and go, they're not worth fixing. It's like they're just waiting for all the residents to leave and turn it into a giant Amazon distribution area or something. I mean, like I said, it's fixable, but it's not an easy fixable. It has too many strengths to be doing this poorly, and that's what's sad. But when a city spends decades battling the same problems with the same limited success, people stop expecting real change and start settling for slightly less bad. They really don't have a strategy, it seems like. It seems like they just have urban exhaustion. 34.1% of Baltimore's residents live below the poverty line. Number 2, Detroit, Michigan. Now, I've said in recent videos, and you should know that Detroit is turning the corner. They're doing really good downtown. And I mean, it's better progress than they've made in decades. And you just hope it starts spreading out to the other neighborhoods sooner than later. But Detroit is probably one of the most famous urban cautionary tales in modern America. Everybody knows some version of the story. Once it was one of the richest and most powerful cities in the country, home to the auto industry, packed with jobs, energy, population, influence, and swagger. But then the jobs started leaving, the factories closed, the population dropped, and the tax base collapsed. Entire sections of the city started looking like the apocalypse had a mailing address. Like I'd said, downtown is better. There is investment. There is momentum in certain neighborhoods. The city has clawed back a measure of pride. But that poverty rate, that's over 35%, tells you the comeback is still very incomplete. For a lot of Detroit residents, much of the hype revival hasn't really shown up at their front door. If you live near the shiny parts, things may feel a little bit better. If you don't, life can still be a grind. Poverty here touches everything from schools, housing, transportation, healthcare outcomes, safety, access to jobs, and neighborhood stability. And that's the hard part about Detroit. The fall was so dramatic that even real progress can look small in comparison to the damage that has been done over the decades. You don't recover from that kind of collapse overnight. You don't recover from it with a couple new restaurants, a sports district, and some optimistic magazine features. Detroit still has heart, maybe more than any other city in America, but heart and hustle can only carry you so far when over 1/3 of the population still is stuck in poverty. Detroit isn't dead, it's just still paying interest on old disasters. 36.1% of their population lives below the poverty line. Alright, before we get to number 1, if you have not subscribed to this channel and hit that like button, I'd like to remind you again to do it. It really matters to the channel. YouTube's really looking at that stuff. I'd appreciate it. Alright, on to number 1. And number 1, Memphis, Tennessee. Yes, Memphis, Tennessee has taken the place of, cities like Detroit, Gary, Camden, New Jersey, as the worst place to live in the United States. And it's not just because of the poverty. The crime rates here are insane. And this one, compared to other ones, when it comes to poverty, it's not even close. Close to half their population is living below the poverty line. It's about 4 out of every 10 residents is living in poverty. At that point, you're not talking about scattered hardship. You're talking about a city-level emergency that has become normal. Memphis is a place with enormous cultural weight, music history, Southern identity, major logistics hub, big personality, national name recognition. If Seoul alone could build the middle class, Memphis would be unbeatable. But that's not how any of this works. The city has struggled for years with low wages, underperforming schools, neighborhood decline, crime, and limited economic mobility for large parts of the population. And those issues don't stay in a neat little box. They feed into each other. Poverty contributes to instability. Instability affects schools and crime. Weak schools affect future earnings. Lower earnings reinforce poverty. Round and round it goes like the world's worst carnival ride. It's like being on a merry-go-round and every third time you go around, someone slaps you in the face as you go by. And what makes Memphis especially rough is how persistent the problem has been. This isn't a temporary downturn. This isn't one factory closure or one bad administration. This is long-term, deeply embedded, and painfully familiar to the people living there. Entire communities have been carrying these burdens for years while the city's leaders rotate through plans, slogans, and speeches that somehow never seem to hit neighborhoods that they're meant to help. Memphis has talent, it has culture, it has grit, it has an identity stronger than most cities could ever dream about. But when 42.3% of your population lives in poverty, that identity starts feeling less like an asset and more like things people point to when they're trying to avoid talking about actual crises. Memphis is the number one on this list because poverty there isn't just high, it's overwhelming. Like I said, 42.3% of their population lives below the poverty line. Alright, that's today's video. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. Let me know in the comment section. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.